Greetings, young one. It is late, but I will tell you the story of the Lost King. But once, he was known by other names, a name he was born to, but not the name he was bred to. Lost King, in his time, in his way, you seek one of many names he went by. His name might be forgotten, but his story is eternal. Look up on some of our oldest tomes, transcripts really, from tapes lost long ago. Perhaps just this way of this old man in remembering, in hoping, in failing to forget.
Jerald Augustus Teuscher, a name I was all too familiar with before he showed up at Vault 76 a month before everything changed. I had known him from my time at Vault Tech University. He was a rather young freshman just as I was graduating from those hollowed halls, the kind of brawny blonde that past Ray Guillaumes would have immensely valued. He was a near-perfect combination of brains and brawn that made him a prime candidate for Vault-Tech's plans for the future. He had transferred from Grafton High but still, through some arrangement, played on their football team. My first memory of him was tackling some player on the other team, half his size, and he could have stopped him more easily, with less violence. Nearly put that poor kid in a wheelchair, and through it all, no regret. His strength was only matched by his intelligence. A cold, almost reptilian brain encased in that head of almost shaggy blonde hair. He never needed help at Vault Tech University. He just seemed to know the answers, with little effort. He was bored, in many ways, but presented himself as the perfect specimen for a vault. Any vault. His father was Matthias Teuscher, an absolute pig of a man who had been mayor of Helvetia, and a medium-sized peg in state politics. I remembered when taking a photo he grabbed my ass and called me Toots, insisted I was too pretty to run a vault. When Jerald was told his admission to Vault 76 was only for him, never faced him. Most, even myself under those circumstances, had at least a feeling of loss. But he never looked back. Maybe he couldn't. When he showed up at my doorstep, something in his eyes told me already knew. He was counting the days until the bombs dropped, like a kid on Christmas Eve. He was not prone to random bouts of violence like most bullies. He watched. He waited. He was a selective predator. He either selected the weakest, or he challenged the strongest. He usually prevailed, but it was the experience he saw, not the victory. A couple of years later he apparently sought out in a ballistas, a formidable challenge. I didn't see the fight myself, but security said it went on for a good 20 minutes. He didn't hold back because she was a girl, or several years younger than him. It is all. He got work. He was different, after all. Followed Annabelle around like he was a long-lost dog running after a master, or a pack leader. He took the initiative to deal with anybody, everybody, who stood in their way. On the other hand, he was one of the top chess players in the vault, and he was almost completely a different person when playing, or dealing with fellow top players. He was quiet, reserved, almost considerate. A bully of his strength could have just settled the board by knocking it over, but each of his moves was calculated. He saw the future in the board. I thought, for a while, that him and Annabelle might be a budding romance, but then I started getting reports of Annabelle and her deviance. While some of my department heads thought he was a dangerous liability, Major Starr remarked him as a powerful asset, a king among pawns, something we would sorely need after we reclaimed the world. Training was difficult as he had little respect for his teachers. He remarked that those who couldn't do, taught. On the other hand, his intelligence and self-education meant he was a valuable asset in many areas: engineering, biochemistry, security. While his tactics were unnecessarily brutal at times, I could always depend on him to find my answers when something disappeared, when I needed a guilty culprit. I was able to rein him in a bit in those last few years. Fewer people sent to the medic, fewer problems in general. I never knew why until maybe a year or so before Reclamation Day. We were playing a slow game of chess. He was taking the Italian approach, slow and drawn out, unusual for him. He finally won, a long and unnecessarily drawn-out checkmate, and then he looked me right in the eye with that sinister smile of his. He asked me if I knew what I asked, that I was one of Vault-Tech's experiments. I initially dismissed the thought. Vault 76 was, rather, a series of experiments, like chessmen on the board, a slow and drawn-out game. And while he gave me a fair shot of winning, in the end, it would be costly, but that it wasn't really my weakness. He said the game was rigged from the start. That stayed with me for the rest of the year, as I read my overseer directives leading up to Reclamation Day, that I had to play the hand I was dealt, the board that was prepared for me. And when I left, and when I finally found Evan, I could hear his voice. The game was rigged. Take away what I loved. Replace it. It was rigged from the start. When I finally returned to Sutton a year later, I dreaded seeing Jerry walk through my door, to see that look in his eye, that he knew, that I knew. He was right all along.
America's greatness was not in its people, but its potential. The present is about potential. The future, the results. I knew, from an early age, America would fail. Weakness at every corner. Potential wasted. There were victories, to be sure, against the communists, for example. But ultimately anybody knew it was going to fail. Years, decades, before the bombs dropped. America failed not because of Washington, a loss of ideals, or even its greed. It failed because of its people. Vault-Tech understood what was at stake in the future. What the future would need. What would need to be cast away to fulfill its potential. It only got a few of the variables wrong. This is the eternal struggle of greatness, of genius, of visionaries, of leaders, of the truly strong. When I speak of strength, I don't mean what those big dumb green brutes have. They are simply bullets without guns. The Bastion, that uncultured hick, with all of his lean build, could level an entire camp of soldiers without even being spotted. Even that limp-wristed Fruit Maxwell has great depths of vision. He sees what is necessary. He isn't clouded, isn't blinded. He sees past the clouds. And Annabelle, a bomb is what they call here. The Alpha and the Omega. Not born to it but bred to it. Throw fire. Throw steel. Your strength is simple. She refuses, today, to bend, to break. The responders, really just creating misery. In the end, propping up the weaker. Those who can't, won't, fight for themselves. The Raiders, David Thorpe, a man of vision. Great even before the war. A god, after the war. The cutthroats could have had it all. Eventually somebody would have overthrown him. But he would set the standard, the stage, the chessboard, for a new world. The provisional government in Charleston was weak from the beginning, plagued by indecision, by doubt. A queen's gambit declined. The Brotherhood of Steel, the first sign of real strength in this world. Fearless, steel-clad, a single mission, a single purpose. I always wonder if Arthur Maxon played chess. Did Elizabeth Tegerty play? Did they see the endgame in the opening moves? The Scorched Plague was an unknown variable. For most, the rules were changed in the middle of the game. But it became an excuse for failure. The Enclave was as obvious as the king behind the pawns. Anybody who studied the game knew it existed. Even those ignorant rednecks calling themselves the Free States could see the board before them. But its first weakness was apparent when I saw the remains of that agent, beaten by an evolved predator. To be fair, there were several. The Death Claw, a pawn, without a king, unfeeling, uncaring. about its place in the world. This mood is a living computer. All that knowledge, and yet, it needed a bag of flesh to make it see. I knew others had survived, but I didn't care. The wisdom would take the chaff from the weight, but I admit a certain happiness in seeing Annabelle being among them. I remember telling her we should pack up, head north, east, anywhere. Let the Queen take her due from the remains of Vault 76. But, apparently after sex and booze, she insisted we had to fight it together, or not at all. A lot of good telling her not at all was preferable did. Though many showed up with pop guns and wooden sticks, I came with an archangel's compliment, told the more stupid among them where to point and which button to push. I rarely doubted Sebastian's stare, but I started to reconsider my estimate when he showed up with just a rifle. But that ended when he took down 3 of those scorched as they ran towards me. I suppose a lesser creature would be thankful. Queen bowed down by a few wolves, and many sheep. Sebastian cast off an A for his victory. I suppose there's meaning in that. I'll need a week or 2 to fully heal. But then this world has to finally face me. Annabelle and Jerald, Jerry, facing the world, together, as friends, as enemies, as adversaries, as a challenge. Perhaps all of the above, in due time.
I think that's enough for tonight. Other stories of the August King can wait for another night, but don't think it's the end. It's never the end.